This afternoon, I am in Boston visiting with Sarah Hook Lee, who since 2003 has been the Associate Dean and Director of Research and Information Services at Northeastern University School of Law. Sarah, it's sort of our custom to begin these conversations learning a little bit about you or whoever with whom I'm speaking as a person, in addition to just a law librarian or colleague. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your life maybe today, and even when you were younger?
Yes. Well, I grew up in northern Maine on a farm, so this is pretty far afield to be in Boston and the cities, which I've been as an adult, but still have family there and go back up and visit. I have 2 children in their 20s now, so...
nice civilized age.
Yes, it's much better than the teenage years.
And on their own dime, I suspect, about now too.
Yeah, so they're
pretty close.
Very enjoyable, so I'm fortunate to have a good family. So.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
So you're a city person now, but I bet your heart is still up there in Maine.
It is in Maine, and I've lived in cities I've lived in Boston, well, it's been over 30 years now that I've been in Boston or in different cities across the U.S., and yes, but my heart's still in Maine, and I still feel like I'm a Maine native.
Well, that's interesting. I'm going to be up in Maine tomorrow, actually, talking with 2 of our colleagues who have recently retired and are living up there. Bob Nussenbaum, who's in Boothbay Harbor.
In Blair.
And Blair Kaufman, who is nearby, relatively. I'm not quite sure what town he's in.
I think he's near Damariscotta, but...
my GPS will get me there, I hope.
You'll find you there, yes.
Yes. So that will be a pleasure. I've actually vacationed up there once in the past. My family, when the kids were in their, well, my daughter was in her early teens, and my son almost. And we had a great trip up to the Bar Harbor area.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun. Well, sort of to complete the picture of you as a person, could I ask if you have any particular hobbies or other special passions or interests that you, in case the dean listens to this, you do outside of work?
Okay. Yes, well, I think that's changed recently. Have a chance to go back to your hobbies, because when I was bringing the children up, everything was like the work and the kids.
Yeah.
So my time needed to be...
Especially in the teenage years when they get so involved in activities.
Yeah, and in the young years and the things that you felt, what spare time there was after work or whatever needed to be with
the kids were your hobby.
Yes, they were my hobby for... So now that I'm, you know, back into that, I'm interested in genealogy. Boston's a great place to be for that. My family is all New England as far as we can tell, and a few Canadian people, but so we're here in Boston with a good genealogical library, so I'm like that. And of course reading. I still read a lot. Books, online, anything information based, you know, movies.
Why not, with all the ease of having that stuff, either you go out for it or even have it at your house.
Yes, that's right. I enjoy it. So those are the main hobbies, and cooking to some extent, but yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Cooking is one of my challenges. I'm very adept at cooking in the microwave. Actually, I'm not quite that limited, but a lot of meals I fix for myself are from the freezer to the microwave.
Yes, microwave is wonderful.
I used to joke that, you know, when I was a bachelor the last time, years ago, a student, we didn't have microwaves long. And I didn't have the wherewithal to buy convenience food in those days. But times change.
Yes.
Yes. Well, can we sort of change the focus more onto you as a law librarian and a colleague? You have 3 degrees.
Yes.
Sarah, can you tell us where you got them, and you know, and more or less, if you want to even mention when?
Yeah. Yes. Well, I guess in being in Boston now, people talk about being a triple eagle, which means that they went to all the degrees. They got them at BC. Well, I'm from Maine, so I call myself a triple black bear. Now, I got all my degrees from the University of Maine. I have a bachelor's from the University of Maine in Orono, which I got in 75. 74. And then I got my master's in library science from them when University of Maine still had a program in the 70s, and I went there next. And then I got my law degree from the University of Maine School of Law in Portland in 1982. So all three in Maine.
As I recall, the library up there in those days was sort of a round shape, the law library.
It is. We used to talk about the law school being in a wedding cake shaped building. It was a 7-story white columns on the outside, so people talked about it being a wedding cake shaped round, and it still is there.
Well, I imagine it served everybody well over the years. Yeah. Well, when preparing for my part of today's conversation, I did a little background check so I wouldn't completely make myself look like an idiot. But I noticed your first job out of library school was a catalog librarian was it Western New England College of Law?
Yes.
That's in Springfield.
In Springfield.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you were there for about a year. Could you tell us a little bit about that job and what you did?
Yes, I was very fortunate to be hired. At that point, of course, I didn't have my law degree. I was right out of library school. But I had the opportunity to work with Don Dunn when he was founding and setting up the Western New England School. And I worked sort of a combination. I was formerly a catalog assistant. He was so pleased he got someone who was out of library school and he had the background in cataloging. But I was a catalog assistant / cataloger when we were setting up, and they were first getting established. And in fact, they achieved, so we started out in Western New England in an old convent school with the library and the basketball court.
Wow.
This goes way back. We had the library set up in the basketball court. Some of it was on stage, some of it was down on the floor. And I worked there, so I was setting up the collection when they were setting up to get ABA accreditation. Later on, Don was starting plans for building the new building, which they're in now. But when I was there, we were in the temporary building, which is a lot of fun.
Well, I inspected them for the ABA, not the first time around, somewhere down the way, because I never saw the
You didn't see the basketball court?
No, I didn't see that part. It was well established.
Yes, it was.
And Don must have been somebody you enjoyed working with. He struck me as a gifted director or leader.
He was, in every way. And he was also, for a young person right out of school, a good manager to learn from when you're first getting your idea of, what is it meaning to be a professional librarian. But he had the combination of, he knew everything there was to know about libraries. He knew people in the collection, in the business, and he had a wonderful sense of humor. So you learned managerially how to work with people in that way that was easy. It made them relaxed. He handled emergencies with aplomb, and things. So I learned a lot just working with him, not only about law librarianship and collection and what you needed to have a foundation collection and what was the backbone of a law library, but also in terms of management of people. And some of the people that worked with me went on to be directors at other places.
Well, nothing wrong with that,
no,
I hope.
No, we didn't. So it was a wonderful place to start.
Well, as I said, I was very, very impressed, not just with the library, but with Don as a colleague and leader. I thought I saw, that he was really more than just competent.
He was gifted, and then sadly no longer with us, but I got a chance to congratulate him on becoming a dean.
That's right. Well,
in California.
He became a dean first there.
Yes.
In Western New England.
And then he went on to become the dean in school in Southern California. So that's where he was before he passed away.
Yeah. I see. We did lose him sort of early. Which is too bad. Or I would be delighted to have a conversation with him for our history.
He knew better, but he was like a smoker in the years when people still smoked. So it wasn't such a bad thing back then, but
Oh, I remember when I was a kid, they had ads on
Oh, the ads were.
all the time, and they had doctors saying that this was good for your throat. Well,
Right. I know it was good for your nerves.
hang
and
them
relax.
all out for malpractice at this point.
I know, it was a different time period.
It
So.
was.
Yeah, we lost him too soon.
Yeah.
But it was, so I was there a year and then moved back to Maine.
So you went back to Maine actually in around 1977, according to my notes, and you became the Library Media Center Director for a school administrative district in Howland, Maine.
Yes.
So you're back sort of closer to your roots.
I was back in my home area.
Can you tell us a little bit about that opportunity, though it's not, I guess, in a law library as
No,
such?
it was not. It was in a school media center that served both a middle school, junior high, and high school in northern Maine. And actually the reason for the move, my first husband had attended Western New England.
Okay.
And after he graduated, he opened a practice up north, and we moved back into our home area. So that's why the switch from Massachusetts back to Maine on that. That was interesting, but I only did that 1 year and decided that was not for me.
Wasn't your thing?
Well, being a person in their early 20s, so I wasn't very old myself. You know, I graduated from college pretty young, in 3 years, so I was still really young, and going into the environment where you had to be a disciplinarian and that was your kind of primary thing, I did not like that. It was kind of too conflict-ridden for me at that age to really be able to enjoy it. Now I would feel more comfortable with that, but I hadn't gotten comfortable being a disciplinarian.
Yeah.
I think at that point in
not
time.
everybody
No.
certainly does
No.
begin
So
liking that.
I liked the collection part of it and the kids who were interested in whatever they're interested in. I think it also helped help my reference answering ability was to say, you know, like tune into what the kids wanted, the kids of a different age group, and what were good materials or suitable things for a 10-year-old might be not for an 18-year-old, and how do you steer them. So I think it helped me in that regard. But I didn't enjoy being the heavy disciplinarian.
Sort of the keep order in the house and referee all the fights and so on.
Yeah, I didn't like that part of it.
I hear you.
Yeah. So I stayed a year, and then that was actually sort of what propelled me into thinking of going to law school. Because at that point, you know, being in a rural area, you don't have the job choices that you do in a city like Boston or any other city where you could try lots of different things and stay in one place. Your job opportunities are more circumscribed in a very rural area. So I got the idea of doing what the librarian who had been at that middle school, high school before I was, decided it wasn't for her either, and she went to law school in Portland. And that is the same thing I did. I met her there, and she was in law school, and a couple of years later I was in law school at the same place.
Now you ended up, just before you started law school, as a paralegal, I believe?
Yes, I did. I was actually just looking at things the other day, some of the stuff I worked on. It was back in the days when people ran titles. Instead of having title insurance on who owned the title and whatever, you actually had to go to the Registry of Deeds and pull down those big old books and look at all of the old deeds from the 1800s and the 1900s and everything, and run up through and to say, does the person who owns it now actually have title? So that they can legally pass it on and give a certain kind of promises and warranties and deeds and things. So it was a lot of fun, actually, especially the Registry of Deeds part of it. I like that a lot.
So you worked as a paralegal for around a year, I believe.
year and a half, yeah.
And then you started law school, and during the summers and so on, you did some
I worked in a
internship.
small firm,
civil.
I got some good experience. It was a small civil practice firm. We didn't do criminal work because the two people who were in the firm actually worked as assistant DAs. And therefore did not take...
They had a conflict.
Yes, had a conflict since they were the regional
both sides
DAs.
of the
Yeah, right, so I couldn't do both. So, but we did general civil practice that you would do, you know, a lot of property transfers, you know, family law, wills. So it was pretty good, diverse experience, as well as learning, being involved in the business end of it to some degree, financially, to see how a small business worked and see how a law firm practiced. So I got to learn a lot of, law practice management. Of course, now that's computer oriented, that's what I'm doing now, but back then it was on the paper, mostly, just coming into word processing. And we thought we were at the height of things with an IBM selector.
Well, that was marvelous, and they only cost in the days when word processors were $17,700.
Right.
Selectric was at $930.
Wonderful.
I had to convince the dean one day that we should spend 17 plus on that fancy new thing, and he agreed. And it moved from there. We never went back.
You never went back again. No, they do more. But so anyway, it was a combination of I got to grow some with the business and grow my own skills, because I started out as a paralegal doing the titles and the behind the scenes and deed preparation and that kind of thing. And as time went on, and I got to the point where I did some basic court hearings and nothing too fancy.
You became actually an attorney along the way and an associate in the firm.
Yes, I worked in the firm for a while. There and did some family law stuff and hearings and that kind of thing. So I got some. I'm glad now, even though I've been in academia for quite a while, I'm really glad I had the base practice, because I know how a small practice works, and I'm able, even though things are done differently now, to be helpful to the students, I think, in when they go out, because a fair number of them do go out and set up in a small practice or work in a small setting, and you can kind of work with them on the modern analogs of what we used then.
Well, it's hard to realize that, this was back in the early 80s, which is, basically a career back from where we are here in 2016.
Yes.
And all the time that's passed
I
and
know.
all that. But you left the firm, and your next job was as legislative counsel to the Maine legislature, Office of Policy and Legal Analysis. And you were there for about 3 years, according to my notes.
Yes.
Can you talk about what you did there and what it was all about?
Yes. One of my favorite jobs of all time, I must say. It was so exciting to be a part of the legislature's work, and I did a little of everything. I was a nonpartisan counsel, bipartisan, and worked for people on the standing committees. So I worked with both the Democrats and Republicans. And things were not quite as heated as they are now between them.
Partisan.
Partisan. Yeah, it was a different time
period. Well, I
can
remember grousing that there wasn't really much change between the two parties and what you'd get. But boy, that's different now.
No, I mean there was a difference. You could even tell the difference then. But people worked together, of course, much more smoothly. And my job was to be the committee's attorney, the legislator's attorney, because of course the lobbyists would come in, and the people presenting the bills would bring in their lobbyists and their presenters, and sometimes they would present entirely accurately, and sometimes it was a bit of puffing on behalf of their
I'm shocked.
Their cause.
To hear that.
And so it was a lot of fun, because you could lean to the person who was the head senator or the head rep and say, ask them this. And by then, I got to know the ins and outs kind of the politics, but I also was their lawyer, so I could say, you might want to ask them about this legal issue, or you might, or sometimes they would draft things and try to slip little things in. Not everybody did this.
Help out.
Help out with a draft, and you'd say, well, I don't know if that's
quite
what
you think.
More than you think, and maybe this is, I think what the committee and what the legislators had agreed on was this. So it was a combination of advising them on hearings, advising them on wording of things. I wrote bills, wrote legislation. Sometimes I wrote the floor speeches for legislators who had learned that if you read something into the legislative record on the floor of the Maine legislature, that became a part of the legislative record, and they would try to indicate their legislative intent. So you'd help them indicate their legislative intent.
I'm sure has impressed the voters and their constituencies.
Yes.
They were active.
And if you were lucky, they took the speech and they did a great job with the speech, and once in a while, it was one that would read the notes that you'd written in the margin of the thing, was saying, here, please emphasize this. And they'd say, here, please emphasize, they would read the notes in, a couple of them would do that, and you're like, oh no. Yeah, it's too bad that got in good. But it was a wonderful thing. I met people who are, you know, in office today, who are, you know, the Chief Justices of the Maine Supreme Court, or different people. So it was wonderful, wonderful to see how government worked and to interact with legislation and big statutory legislation, in the sense that I worked in the business area. I worked mostly in business and labor and financial regulation was my specialty. And so you worked with, you know, unemployment insurance, looked at the federal, looked at the state versions of it. But legislatively, it was some contentious issues like worker safety, workers' compensation, unemployment, issues like that, which brought in people from all over the United States when it was a big topic, when you kind of want to feel like hiding the proposed legislation under my bed or in the trunk of the car, so that no one would see, would see the proposed legislation that might get out there, because people were looking at it.
Sure.
And everything, so it was, some things were really big and contentious, and banking deregulation, for example, in that time period. Maine was a forerunner in, I think it was the first state to do banking, deregulate banking. And it's done, even though it's a traditional state in some ways, it's very, they try things out. They try
progressive.
Progressive,
yeah,
in certain ways. Progressive and independent thinking, independent-minded. So they would try these things out. But then we would have things as picturesque as the people campaigning for Elvis Presley's birthday to be made a state and national holiday, which was a lot of fun too. But a different kind of hearing we did. So anyway, it was a great job. You can tell I
must have had some very interesting experience.
I did. I saw John Glenn. I saw, they would bring people in when you work in the State House, so make sure you see all sorts of people that come in. Alder Millendale shows up. Whoever you look out in the hall. It looks like John Glenn. Oh, it is John Glenn. It was a lot of fun. Yeah. Great job.
Well, you actually left that job and living in the state of Maine.
Yes.
And came back down here to Boston in, what, about 1986, I think.
Yes, I did. My first husband and I had divorced by that point, and I was making a new start, and decided, I've been living in Maine a long time. I loved it, but I'm going to try a different arena, a different space, and the city. Yeah. So the nearest big city, obviously, to Maine is Boston, and that's where I went.
It's certainly close at hand, so
yes,
to speak, but
yes,
it is big.
Yeah.
I've noticed the traffic is pretty fierce in this town.
It is bad. It isn't as bad as San Francisco, but it is bad.
Maybe so. I'll take that on faith.
Yeah. No, it's.
Because I have not driven in that town.
Yeah, no, San Francisco was pretty competitive too, but it's heavy, and you can definitely see the economy ebbing and flowing here in Boston. Having come here in the mid-'80s, when things were booming, and then they went into a bust with the real estate, the savings and loan crash, and so every boom and bust cycle that are going on with the real estate here, or the economy, or banking, or anything like that, you could see it in the traffic.
Oh, I'm sure. People somehow drive more if they're affluent.
Yes.
Because they get paychecks.
Yes.
Yes. So you came here again in '86 and became legal counsel to the Massachusetts Cable TV Commission.
Yes.
Are you the one I can blame if I don't like my pricing back home? I'm from the cable company.
Well, we were in the midst of the Reagan Revolution at that time, and the Reagan Revolution and the people in Washington had deregulated national cable to do whatever it wanted and let the free market take care of your cable TV problems. Massachusetts, being a more democratically oriented state, had kept its cable TV commission. We had limited things that we could do thanks to national deregulation, but we could do some consumer regulations and, what's in the bill, are people being fairly told, if people had complaints, they could call. We were part of the Office of Consumer affairs, essentially,
Okay.
here in the Dukakis administration at the time. And so we had limited things we could do after the Reagan bill went through, but we had some things we could do to try to help people out and advocate with the companies. But it then went fully deregulated at some point, and it was essentially, we have what we have now. It's just, the cable TV people were not a lot different then than they are now.
Well, they were, they're businessmen.
They're businessmen.
They want to make money.
Exactly. That was
More
the
the
big thing.
merrier.
And we used to joke about them having different telephone numbers. There was the one for new business, and then there was the one for consumers calling into an existing business. So it did teach me a trick that sometimes when you can't get past the recordings on the lines, that you pretend to be a new customer, because we saw sometimes that that's what our consumers had to do.
That is an interesting tidbit.
Interesting.
Yes, we should charge admission to watch this video.
Right.
Because of that very tidbit
Yeah,
alone.
just passing that along from how we had to help consumers out sometimes.
Well,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Yeah. Often I just ignore all the prompts and finally it
It
connects
hits
me
zero.
to somebody, although I have been kicked off too and just hung up on.
They they do that now. You had to the technology keeps evolving. You have to keep
That's right.
evolving your tactics.
That's right. I guess if they figure you don't know what to push, either you have no reason to call or maybe worse you do and they don't want to talk
They
to you
don't want to talk to you.
Well, you were with Massachusetts Cable TV Commission for about a year, I think.
Yeah, so a little over a year. It's my first job in state government, and one thing that I had noticed, well, it kind of happened in Maine, happened here again, is that we see this on the national and the state level, is once you're in government, you have certain expertise in regulatory affairs or certain areas, you also become of interest to either law firms or companies who have government affairs offices.
And that is a nice segue into what you did next.
Exactly. So what I did next was I went on to John Hancock Insurance Company. It's now been purchased by an international consortium. It sold out. It was a mutual life insurance company at the time, and now does financial affairs. So at the time, it was still Boston-based, and we were in the headquarters here in the Hancock Tower. And I worked in government affairs, which was a part of the corporate counsel's office at the time. And because I was a very junior newbie in the field of the department stuff, but I had worked in, when I was with the Maine legislature, I had worked on insurance. And I had some insurance expertise in different insurance programs. So it was a good education, a good segue for me into learning more about the insurance business. The company was a wonderful corporate citizen into the city of Boston. They still sponsor the marathon, but they sponsored a lot of really great local events and local charities and local events of all kinds, and encouraged us.
Nice to have a company when you still have them that are
Yes.
locally based in that sense.
They were very much, I feel grateful that I was working there at that time. Before things were quite so globalized, we still had our local companies here. A lot of things in Boston, including the law firms now, are being purchased or merging with things based in DC or New York, but at the time there were a lot more Boston companies. So I got a chance to kind of do a lot of, going to conferences and taking legislature, putting the company on and attending conferences where legislators might be hearing insurance issues. We did that. We attended hearings here. I didn't get to do speaking or anything very much because there were two very senior people who did the speaking. So I was a new person, but it was a lot of fun, and I got to see John Hancock when I was there was the first big company, one of the first in the nation and the first in this area to start sponsoring like the AIDS walk and AIDS treatment and raising money for AIDS awareness and AIDS treatment, which was extremely progressive in that time period, especially for an insurance company. They're again, as I say, it's a corporate citizen. They really put themselves out there and did a lot of good.
You think of the insurance industry as being a little on the conservative side, socially at least.
Well, they were on many. I mean, I suppose to some degree, it was against against the interest of insurance at the time, they were scared. They were scared of the insurance exposure, the actuarial risk at this, of this scary new disease, new at the time, and people didn't understand, they didn't know what was happening. But on the other hand, they could see the impact it was having on people's lives, the negative impact on people's lives and on the community of people that they knew here in the greater Boston area, and had enough heart to get involved. So anyway, it was, again, a different era. The local companies could get very involved in local things, not just for branding, but for, because they felt they would feel the need in the community. And it was an interesting blending of law and regulation, how insurance regulation, again, national and state regulators were involved in the insurance business, so I got to see some of that. And, yeah.
Well, it's interesting, after some time with the insurance company, you sort of did a whole reversal in your career again. You're back to your early days, and you are back in as a law librarian.
Well,
this time in a very interesting setting.
It was an interesting setting, and it's like some of life you plan out to the best of it, and some of it is just way leads on to way, as they say on it. I had remarried. I stayed home with my baby, essentially. My eldest child was born, and that's why I finished with John Hancock. I was home for a couple of years with a little one. And then I got back into law librarianship almost accidentally. And it worked out. It's wonderful. It's like serendipity or fate or whatever. It's been a wonderful career. But what happened was Massachusetts School of Law was a new school. Yeah. Massachusetts is one of only 2 states left in the country that have local accreditation of law schools. Like California, a school can become accredited in the state of Massachusetts following the procedures here.
So the students can sit for the bar here, but maybe not other places.
Right. Initially they could sit for the bar here, and I will say after I went on into other places that Massachusetts School of Law has been extremely creative, and they're wonderful advocates. They were very good on advocacy and in training in students to be good advocates and to be good lawyers. And they have gotten permission in, I don't know how many other states, but a lot of other states to say that if you've completed the school, passed the bar exam in here or a nearby state, that you have permission to take it in maybe New Hampshire or Maine or Vermont. Or they've gotten, I think, 10 or 15 states.
The market for their students.
They did. But when we were there, when I first went to work for them, actually, this is why I said serendipity, I'd actually interviewed at Massachusetts School of Law for a part-time adjunct position teaching legal research and writing, and I thought, well, but legal research and writing, I should be able to teach that. And I interviewed, and they said, well, we don't have any openings right now, but if we have something open up later, we'll call you back. So the next summer, my daughter was a year older, and I got a call, and they say, we've had an opening. We're going to have an opening. Would you like to come back? And I said, sure. So I went back to interview, I thought, for an adjunct position, and when I got there, they were interviewing for the law library director position.
Oh,
and they remembered me.
Maybe Don put in a good word for it.
Well, I think he probably did, as much as he could, but they had remembered me, and they had liked me from my interview before, and I, was young and enthusiastic and all. And I came back, and it was, of course, I could interview without any advanced nerves because I hadn't been thinking, I'm preparing to interview as a law library director when I haven't worked in the law library since my years in cataloging for Don Dunn. But so I was quite relaxed. It's like, I had no intent. I thought, well, I was probably going to stay home with my daughter till she was a little older. But it was a really exciting opportunity, a really exciting group of people because as I say, it was a startup law school. I had some startup experience in essence working under Don when Western New England was starting, which was brand new at the time, and got accredited while I was while I was there, got its accreditation. So I had, build up experience and how do you build a new law library that wasn't there before, and how do you start? I had that. And there was a fledgling library there, a small library, and they were in a temporary facility at the time. And they were great people to work with. I learned probably more at that job than any other job, because when you're in a startup business, a startup law school or organization of any kind, you're involved in everything. You know, you do disciplinary panels, you teach classes, you were on the admissions committee,
It's probably an exciting time
It
to
was
be part
exciting.
of a place, because so much is happening and
Yes.
you're really part of it, all of you.
Yes, we were, and you're very much a part of everything from the ground floor. So it was really exciting. And at the time, about a few weeks after I started, maybe a month after I started, I remember getting a call from our dean and said, "I have good news for you. We're going to go for ABA accreditation a lot faster than we originally planned." I said, "Oh, good, so okay. When are we going for it?" He said, "I want you to have a plan written within the next 5 months that's going to get us accredited." And of course, I was coming back into law libraries after my, I practiced law essentially for several years, and libraries had changed, from, it wasn't the mammoth changes there are now, but certainly a lot of changes since I worked for Dawn in the late 70s. But I credit a lot of the great law librarians who helped me out at that time period, because once I was told that I needed to produce a strategic plan that would get us accredited, I'm like, well, I have to figure this out, don't I?
Well, I hope the first item in the strategic plan was a note to the dean to raise lots of money, because this is not going to be inexpensive.
Well, it was an interesting time. I thought, well, first I have to figure out, since when I got there was only one employee, my first order of business was to go interview people who knew more what they were doing than I did at that point. And the first one I went to was Don Dunn, and
I'm not surprised.
Not surprised at
And a
Don.
good choice for
Yeah, so
everybody.
excellent choice. And he said, "I can only help you so much. This is a rival school in the same state as we are, but I'm going to point you in the right direction as much as I can." So he gave me, a lot of help, a lot of kind of essentially free consulting help, as much as I could take notes on in a day. He referred me to a lot of great law library directors and law librarians around New England that he thought would be good role models or well worth talking to, including people who were in relatively new law schools. Judy Geyer, who was for many years the director at Franklin Pierce in Concord, which is now the UNH Law School, but she was a small operation, relatively small staff, and I went up and spent time with her. She and her whole staff were wonderful. This is how we do things, this is how our Cardex works, this is how to check it. I learned so much visiting other law schools, particularly, and she was particularly gracious, and so was Dawn, and people who worked at Western New England at the time. So call him out. He also recommended we needed a law library consultant to help us build a law library, and he felt that he couldn't do it because being in the same state, that would be a conflict.
I would think it would,
yeah, and
he'd want to be careful.
He had to be very careful, and he'd be careful about what he could say and do, and didn't want to disadvantage his school, because of course he was with...
Or worse, if things didn't work out for yours, to get sort of blamed.
Well, yes, that too. So for our consultant, he recommended Nancy Johnson in Georgia.
Good choice.
Who was an excellent choice, and he was like, she's wonderful, she knows it all, she's done it all, you wouldn't take a lot of guff, she's not putting on airs, she would just, give you wonderful information and has wonderful sense of judgment. And that is what she proved to be. Again, she flew in later, and our next consultant, who else did we had later on? She was our initial consultant, and she got it off the ground, and then before we did our first inspection, Betty Johnson was our consultant.
Okay.
Betty has passed away now, but so is Nancy, but I don't know if you got a chance to interview her before.
I
was
did
Good.
get to Nancy. She was, again, did I allude to you? I've told several that we just had a priority
Yeah,
some
and
list.
I'm glad she
was
made
on
it
it.
to the top.
And so one of the very first trips I took was to Atlanta.
Yeah.
And that was basically to get her on the recording.
She was wonderful, and she gave me personnel advice. The person who was there was undermining what we were doing, not on board, and, you know, different, again, I was a new manager, like, how do you handle a person like this? How do you try to bring people along? How do you decide what new positions you need and what they should do, what they should specialize in, and how to get them, you know, authorized in the dean? So she did that, and so it was everything from how to run a great library, what you really need for the basics of a library, to, as a working mother, when you were really under time duress, what costumes took the least time to assemble for a child. Because she said, if you're not at home, you don't have a lot of time to make custom-made costumes for your kids. But here's what I do with my son. So she was...
Well, she was really a comprehensive kind of...
She was a comprehensive consultant in many ways, so she was...
Very useful.
Yes.
I'm sure.
So we set up the library and went for ABA accreditation about, I think it was 2.5 years after I started, which was a very difficult time. I had a small child and I was pregnant with another, and my dad was dying, and the ABA was coming. So I had a trial by fire that winter on it. And
sounds like an experience you probably haven't wished to repeat.
No, it was a hard time, but you know, it shows you what you can do. You know, when you're under challenge and when you need to rise to the occasion, you rise to the occasion. So the ABA came in, and if you know Massachusetts School of Law, I mean, they never did attain accreditation. A lot of the things. I remember
the stories. Yeah.
Well, Jane Hammond was our first inspector.
Oh, was she?
She was our first inspector, and I give her a lot of credit for that. I think there are a lot of rules that the ABA had at the time about what a real library needed to be, what a large law library needed to be. And I think the people at Mass School of Law were mostly concerned, their primary concern was that education, legal education, be affordable to everyone, including the little guy or people for more modest needs. And so a primary thing was people there had many hats, as I said. I was teaching, I was an administrator, I was an administrator. Everybody wore a lot of hats, and under the formulas that they had at the time, we didn't meet the ratios. That was one thing, that because you were both an associate assistant dean and a professor, you didn't count as a professor. That was the way the ratios and formulas worked.
But again, those rigid, or
they were quite rigid at the time.
Pretty rigid standards.
They were.
I think you could pretty well figure out where you might have some problems, but then people sometimes, deans and others, don't always.
Some deans, I think our dean had a cause. He had a cause that, in this case, rather than us just blindly falling in line with what needed to be done, that the standards should come down and be more reasonable to start-up law schools and new law schools and law schools that didn't cost us much.
It's an interesting
He had a cause
of Jane to be your inspector. One might have thought that since she came from such an elite school, Cornell, that they might have wanted to have someone who would identify a little more with where you were.
I think they wanted someone who was really solid and very tested, who knew the ABA.
Oh, she knew it.
She knew it cold. She was part of it. So our team was made up of people who knew the standards of the ABA very well, who were very trusted by the ABA, because they were looking and knowing that our dean and our school and board of directors of the school might well choose to litigate.
Yeah.
And therefore they needed people, really seasoned people on that team.
Well, Jane was part of the council and worked on the library and many of those standards. I remember being in a meeting when I was ALL's official rep to the council, section on legal education of the bar. The library standards were being revised at that time. Jane was in the room, Roger Jacobs, who succeeded her, was there, and then I was there, and it was a very interesting experience to be part of that.
Yeah.
They were really wonderful colleagues.
Yeah, they were very good, and I give her a lot of credit, because that was a tough position to be in, coming in there with a really tense environment, not knowing, and she didn't let me off easy. She grilled me closely on everything.
Well, given
and
the chance that this was a big thing for everybody, she probably had to be very, very
She
cautious.
did, but she really listened. She could see that we had done what we had done with the money we had and with the resources we had at the time. It was a good small library. It wasn't a real national scale law libraries, in certainly not Cornell scale or even a small law school scale. But it was, you know, we had 7 people, we had a solid library, we were what we were. And so she could see that, you know, I wasn't trying to put anything over on her, and that the library was what it was, and we had reasons for what we did, and I had consulted with people and everything. So she questioned me hard on all sorts of, she knew the standards, she knew the money, she knew everything. So I got questioned hard, but she could see that I wasn't trying to pull any fast ones on her, and she wrote the report fairly. She described factually what we had, you know, and she didn't get sued. You know, I mean, when it came down to it, she had done her job, which is what they tell people to be careful to do now. I do inspections now, and they say, you're there to find the facts. And that's what Jane did. So she did a really good job.
Yeah. Based on the experience with your school and some others, I know the ABA through that era was tightening considerably the discretion of the inspectors to sort of focus in the reports on some of what they chose.
Yeah, I think
it became a lot more structured. And
it was very structured. The training you get now as an inspector is much more structured, where it used to be, I think, more subjective. Of an inspector could come in and say, well, I don't think this is a good library. And your inspector the next year, or your provisional inspector, might say, oh, I disagree entirely with that. So to some degree, there was probably too much discretion at one point.
Well, I think that was, in fact, there was a little too much latitude, and they needed to focus these a little more carefully.
They did focus them. And then, I mean, going back to Don again, Don was one of the first people. He had his famous questionnaire that he used.
Yes.
If you know, when he inspected.
I had that used when we hired Roy Mursky, who was a mentor to Don.
He was, Don trained under Roy.
Questionnaire, I mean, it really disclosed a lot about the library. It was well worth using.
It was worth using.
Question. It was hard to fill out because it was so detailed.
It was detailed, and it was written by people who really knew about libraries and could ask important questions and knowledgeable questions. But so that kind of like, I use the same questionnaire with different schools. That approach of like what questionnaires are used or what are the expectations and standards. And the other thing that was, it was, you know, given my legislative background and how much I really like the legislation, statutes, regulations, and things, working with the ABA was like working with another legislative body. You know, we had the standards, there was the written standards, there were interpretations to the standards. There was also kind of common knowledge, or I don't know if you want to call it customary law or whatever, that people could say, well, usually when they read that, they think this, that kind of thing. So you kind of had to look at it and look at the changes in the standards over the years. And for my employer, say, you know, you changed those standards from this to this, and therefore we have a good argument that you've loosened this up and mean that. You shouldn't still be using the same list you used 10 years ago. If you've changed the wording, it's like statutory interpretation. So again, that kind of the legislative background came in very useful at that time, looking at the ABA as a regulatory body for my client.
Before we move on in your career, can I insert a couple of questions there?
Sure.
You started off some years before, before you came to Massachusetts School of Law, working for Don, but this is really your first real law library position in the normal sense. Can I ask you how it was you decided to become a law librarian, and did anyone particular play a role in that?
Well, you know, when I moved to Massachusetts, I by then had both degrees. I had my master's in librarianship and I had my JD, and I had worked in a legislative setting in Maine. And when I moved here, of course, I'm starting anew without a lot of connections here, and thinking, what do? You know, I came I have experience way back, a few years ago in law literature, but I also have experience in legislative law and things. And I learned quickly that the only way you functioned in Boston was to talk to people and say, so-and-so referred me to talk to you. Lots and lots of networking. And I started with connections of people I had known in Maine when I was with the legislature there, who said, well, my brother's in the Department of Revenue, or, I know this person who's in the Senate or whatever. And going from there, you went from person to person and did essentially informational interviews. White Keller is your parachute was relatively new then, so it was like, okay, I've got to live this. But I went, so I obviously was interested in someone in law literature, but then I talked to, at the time, I found out there was some talking around to lots of people. They said, well, you should talk to someone in the law librarians of New England, who knows the lay of the land in there. And I ended up talking to Darcy Kirk, who was the collections librarian at BC Law School at the time. And then they referred me to her, and she was just super friendly and said, sure, come on out, I'll talk to you about it. But at that point in time, people, especially in firms who were hiring, were a little wary of hiring someone who had a JD.
Well, I remember that.
You remember?
In DC, same thing. They were afraid they wanted to become lawyers through the back door.
Yes. And so I attempted to look into like firm libraries, but they were afraid of that, and they would say, well, we might have to buy extra malpractice insurance if you were around.
Oh, we don't want to hear that.
You don't want to hear that, and we don't know, you might, not really. So at that point in time, and there was nothing had opened up at that time in the schools. So instead of going into law librarianship at that time, I thought, well, I guess I'm going into following the legislative arena panned out first. But anyway, that was my first contact with law librarians of New England, and with Darcy, who I'm currently with today. And
who later, by way of Georgetown, is back in New England.
Back in New England.
It has been for quite a few years.
Yes, she has. And I work with her now as an ELCO officer.
Yeah.
She's an officer.
I had occasion to have one of these conversations with her at the law school, of all times, Sunday evening of this week. Oh, I accommodate people's schedules if I'm doing these things.
Well, she's not only head of the Library and Information Services, but she's the Associate Dean of the Law School at this point, so she's a very busy person.
We talked all about that. It's one of the reasons I think she figured she had Sunday night off.
Sunday night might
be. So Pat Keogh could monopolize her time.
Yeah, right. During the week, she's being Associate Dean. But so I ended up doing several years more of kind of legislative related things. But then, as I say, I went to Mass School of Law. I fell into this, heaven or fate or whatever universe was looking out for me, and it was a wonderful job. And then I've been casting around, and I loved it. Yeah. I just loved managing the library and learning. There's never a dull day.
Yeah, you were there what, about 6 years?
Yeah, almost 7 years. Yeah.
So about 96, 97, we were in there. You moved west to Minnesota.
Yes.
And St. Paul specifically.
Yes.
And William Mitchell College of Law. You want to talk a little bit about that phase of your career?